Cleveland, Ohio, a city plagued by darkness. In the heart of this bustling metropolis, a sinister secret festered. Unspeakable acts committed under the veil of normalcy, the stench of death, a haunting premonition of the horror to be unveiled. This is the story of Anthony Sowell, the Cleveland Strangler, his name forever etched in the annals of criminal history, his crimes a chilling reminder of the darkness that can lurk beneath the surface. October 29, 2009, a day that would forever change Cleveland. It began with a stench, overpowering, emanating from 1020 Imperial Avenue, a seemingly ordinary house, but within, a house of horrors awaited. Little did they know their worst nightmares were about to be realized. Anthony Edward Sowell, born August 19, 1959. His life, a twisted tapestry woven with threads of violence and depravity. Sowell's childhood, a breeding ground for the darkness that would consume him. Raised in a chaotic household marked by abuse and neglect. A home where violence was the norm, not the exception. One can only imagine the psychological scars etched upon his young psyche. The seeds of evil sown in the fertile ground of a troubled upbringing, a monster in the making. (1978), Sowell, barely a man, enlisted in the United States Marine Corps, a seemingly noble pursuit, a chance to escape the demons of his past. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. Vietnam War, a conflict that scarred a generation, leaving many like Sowell forever changed. The horrors of war, a crucible that forged his darkness into something more sinister. 7 years he served, earning medals and commendations for his service. But beneath the veneer of bravery, a darkness festered. The war within far from over. Section 3, A Criminal Uncaged. Upon his return from Vietnam, Sowell's demons followed. The violence he had witnessed, the trauma he had endured, now a part of him. 1989, the first sign of the monster within, a brutal attack on a pregnant woman, his MO, a chilling foreshadowing of the horrors to come. Convicted and sentenced to 15 years in prison. A punishment that seemed fitting for his heinous crime. But the justice system, flawed and unforgiving, would play a role in his future atrocities. After serving only a fraction of his sentence, Sowell was released, free to roam the streets once more, a predator unleashed. Section 4, Red Flags Ignored. Sowell's release, a harbinger of the horrors to come. Neighbors complained of foul odors, missing person reports filed, yet the authorities failed to act. Warning signs ignored or dismissed, a systemic failure that allowed Sowell to continue his reign of terror unabated. His victims, often marginalized women, overlooked and forgotten. Their disappearances, barely a blip on the radar of law enforcement. It would take years and the discovery of a gruesome scene for the truth to finally be revealed. A house of horrors on Imperial Avenue, a testament to the failures that allowed a monster to thrive. Section 1, The Discovery, September 2009. The stench emanating from 1220 Imperial Avenue had become unbearable. Neighbors, their suspicions growing, contacted the authorities once more. This time, their pleas were not ignored. Police arrived at Sowell's doorstep. Armed with a search warrant, they prepared to enter the abyss. Nothing could have prepared them for the horrors that awaited. Section 2, A Gruesome Collection. The interior of the house was like stepping into a nightmare. The overpowering stench of decay permeated every inch of the dwelling. As officers cautiously made their way through the house, they were met with a sight that would forever be seared into their memories. Bodies, decomposing, hidden throughout the house, in the living room, buried in the backyard, even in the crawl space. The house on Imperial Avenue was a mass grave. Section 3, Uncovering the Depths of Depravity. As investigators meticulously combed through the crime scene, the true extent of Sowell's depravity became horrifyingly clear. 11 victims, all women, most strangled. Their bodies, often bound and gagged, bore the marks of unimaginable suffering. Some had been sexually assaulted, others dismembered. Sowell's modus operandi, a chilling testament to his sadistic nature. Section 4. The Neighborhood's Nightmare. News of the gruesome discovery at 1220 Imperial Avenue spread like wildfire through Cleveland. Disbelief, anger, fear. The neighborhood, once a place of relative tranquility, was now a community in mourning. Families of the missing clung to hope, only to have it cruelly ripped away. Their loved ones discarded like trash in the house of a monster. The Cleveland Strangler, a name that would forever be synonymous with the city's darkest chapter. Anthony Sowell's reign of terror had come to an end, but the scars he left on the community would run deep. The city of Cleveland was left to grapple with the horrifying reality that a serial killer had operated within its midst for so long. Unanswered questions lingered. How could this have happened? And how many more victims were out there? The horrors unveiled at 1220 Imperial Avenue sent shockwaves through Cleveland. But amidst the horror and disbelief, a chilling question emerged. How? How could a man commit such heinous acts right under the noses of his neighbors and the authorities? The answer, as it often is in such cases, was a complex and disturbing tapestry of systemic failures. For years, whispers of Sowell's strange behavior had circulated through the neighborhood. The foul odor, the constant stream of women coming and going from his house at odd hours. These red flags, though noticed, were largely ignored. Some neighbors, overcome with fear or apathy, chose to remain silent. Others who did report their concerns to the police were met with indifference or inaction. Police visits to Sowell's home were often cursory, if they happened at all. Records show that numerous calls for service were made to the address, but few resulted in any meaningful investigation. Whether due to negligence, incompetence, or a callous disregard for the predominantly poor and minority communities Sowell preyed upon, the authorities failed to connect the dots. And so, Sowell was allowed to continue his reign of terror, his victims piling up, unnoticed and forgotten. The failures in the Sowell case were not limited to the police department. Multiple opportunities to apprehend Sowell and prevent further tragedy were missed by other institutions as well. In 2005, a woman reported that Sowell had raped and attempted to strangle her. Despite DNA evidence linking him to the crime, Sowell was released due to what prosecutors deemed weaknesses in the case. This failure to prosecute allowed Sowell to walk free, emboldened and more dangerous than ever. It was a catastrophic error in judgment, one that would have deadly consequences. The victims of Anthony Sowell were not random strangers. They were members of the Cleveland community, many struggling with poverty, addiction, or mental health issues. They were mothers, daughters, sisters, and friends. Their lives, though often marginalized and overlooked by society, mattered, and yet they were failed. Failed by a system that was supposed to protect them, but instead allowed them to become prey to a predator. Failed by a society that often turned a blind eye to the plight of the most vulnerable. The case of Anthony Sowell exposed a fatal flaw in the system, a flaw that allowed a serial killer to operate undetected for years. This case brought to light the chilling reality that our systems designed to protect us can sometimes fail in the most devastating ways. It highlighted the dangers of indifference, the perilous consequences of a society that chooses to look the other way, of turning a blind eye to the suffering of others. When we ignore the cries for help, we allow darkness to fester in the shadows. It underscored the tragic consequences of failing to address systemic issues like poverty, addiction, and mental health. which are often the breeding grounds for such horrors. These issues, if left unchecked, can create a fertile ground for exploitation and violence, which can leave individuals vulnerable to exploitation and violence. The victims of these systemic failures are often the most marginalized, those who have already been failed by society in countless ways. The story of Anthony Sowell is not just a tale of a monster, but a stark reminder of the human capacity for both good and evil. It forces us to confront the uncomfortable truth that such evil can exist in our midst, often unnoticed, but a stark reminder of the human capacity for both good and evil. It challenges us to reflect on our own actions and the impact they have on those around us. It is a story about the choices we make, the paths we choose to follow, and the moral dilemmas we face every day. The responsibility we have to each other, to look out for one another, and to ensure that no one is left behind, and the consequences of our failures. When we fail to act, we allow tragedies to unfold, leaving scars that may never heal. Most importantly, it is a story that demands justice. Justice for the victims who suffered unimaginable horrors, and justice for a community forever scarred by the horrors of 1220 Imperial Avenue. This story is a call to action, a plea for vigilance, compassion, and a commitment to never let such a tragedy happen again. May 2011. The eyes of Cleveland, indeed the nation, turned to the courtroom. Anthony Sowell, the accused monster, faced justice. The weight of 11 lives hung heavy in the air. The victims, their faces displayed prominently, a stark reminder of the gravity of the crimes. The prosecution, armed with a mountain of evidence, prepared to present their case. Their goal, to hold Sowell accountable for his heinous acts and deliver a measure of closure to the grieving families. The prosecution methodically laid out the state's case, each piece of evidence adding to the gruesome puzzle. DNA evidence linked Sowell to the victims, irrefutably connecting him to the crimes. The gruesome discoveries at 1220 Imperial Avenue, painstakingly documented by forensic experts, painted a horrifying picture of the horrors that unfolded within those walls. Witnesses, some of whom had barely escaped Sowell's clutches, bravely shared their chilling accounts of his brutality and depravity. Their testimonies, filled with terror and heartbreak, provided a glimpse into the minds of the victims in their final moments. Sowell's defense team, faced with the overwhelming evidence against their client, attempted to paint him as a mentally ill individual, incapable of understanding the gravity of his actions. They argued that his troubled childhood, his experiences in Vietnam, and his history of substance abuse had left him mentally and emotionally scarred, unable to control his impulses. However, their arguments rang hollow in the face of the sheer brutality and premeditation of Sowell's crimes. The prosecution skillfully dismantled the defense's claims, presenting a portrait of a calculated killer who had carefully selected his victims and taken steps to conceal his crimes. After weeks of agonizing testimony and mountains of evidence, the jury reached a verdict: guilty, on 11 counts of aggravated murder. The weight of the decision hung heavy in the air, a culmination of relentless pursuit of truth and justice, on countless other charges related to his crimes. Each piece of evidence meticulously presented, each testimony a step closer to this moment. The courtroom erupted, a wave of relief and anguish washing over the families of the victims. Tears flowed freely, a mix of sorrow and a semblance of closure. Justice had been served, but it could not bring back their loved ones. The empty seats at dinner tables, the silent echoes of laughter that once filled their homes, remained. Anthony Sowell was sentenced to death. The judge's words were final, a decree that echoed through the halls of justice. A punishment commensurate with the horrific nature of his crimes, yet a hollow victory for those forever marked by his depravity. The sentence, though just, could never erase the pain. The trial of Anthony Sowell, the Cleveland Strangler, was over. The media frenzy that had surrounded the case began to dissipate, but the memories lingered. But the scars he left on the city of Cleveland, on the families of his victims, and on the very soul of justice would never truly heal. The city, forever changed, carried the weight of his actions, a reminder of the fragility of safety and the enduring strength of the human spirit. The trial concluded. Anthony Sowell awaited his fate, but the city of Cleveland, forever marked by his crimes, struggled to heal. The house at 1220 Imperial Avenue, once a place of unimaginable horror, stood as a chilling reminder of the evil that had lurked within. A constant specter, haunting the neighborhood and the city at large. The community, fractured and wounded, grappled with the knowledge that such darkness could reside in their midst. The sense of safety, of trust, shattered. The scars of Sowell's crimes ran deep, a constant reminder of the vulnerability of innocence and the fragility of life itself. For the families of the victims, the pain was immeasurable, their loved ones stolen from them in the most brutal and senseless way imaginable, their lives forever changed by the shadow of Sowell's evil, the void left by their absence, a constant ache in their hearts. They found solace in each other, sharing their grief and their memories, their strength and resilience, a testament to the enduring power of love in the face of unimaginable loss. But the pain, the anger, the haunting question of why lingered. Their fight for justice might be over, but their journey through grief was far from finished. The case of Anthony Sowell served as a chilling wake-up call, not just for Cleveland, but for the nation. It exposed the systemic failures that allowed a predator to operate undetected for years, highlighting the need for change. Law enforcement implemented new protocols, emphasizing community policing and improved communication with marginalized communities. Social services received increased funding aimed at addressing the root causes of vulnerability that predators like Sowell exploit. But the lessons learned came at a devastating cost. 11 innocent lives extinguished, a community forever scarred, a reminder that vigilance and compassion are not optional, but essential to preventing future tragedies. The story of Anthony Sowell, the Cleveland Strangler, is a difficult one to tell, to hear, to comprehend. It forces us to confront the darkest aspects of human nature, the capacity for evil that exists within some. But it is a story that must be told, a story that demands to be remembered. The lives lost, the families shattered, the community scarred. These are not just statistics, but real people with dreams, hopes, and futures that were cruelly taken away. Not to glorify the killer, but to honor the victims. Each name, each face, each story deserves to be remembered, not as a footnote in a tale of horror, but as a testament to the lives they lived and the love they left behind. Not to sensationalize the violence, but to learn from the mistakes that allowed it to happen. The legacy of Anthony Sowell should not be one of fear, but of action. It should inspire us to look closer, to listen more intently, to act more decisively when we see signs of danger. A call to create a world where such horrors are unthinkable, where communities are vigilant and protective of their most vulnerable members, where every life is valued, where the safety and well-being of each individual is a collective responsibility, where every voice is heard. Never again should a community endure the pain, the loss, the unimaginable grief, the scars left by a predator like Anthony Sowell. We must remember the past to protect the future, to ensure that such darkness never takes root again. Never again should we allow such darkness to take root. Let us be the light that drives it away, the voice that speaks out, the hands that build a safer, more compassionate world, more